I watched the line of our campfires go out one by one, though no man rose to smother them and no wind troubled the leaves. The jungle about us held its breath, as if listening. Henderson's hand shook, so that the Martini Henry rattled against his canteen. From the blackness beyond the last ember came a soft, deliberate tread in the leaf mold, circling, never seen, always nearer. Men have asked me to recount this journey, and I oblige now with some reluctance, for I am not certain such knowledge is a kindness. If you would hear more of these old expeditions and weigh them against your own courage, lend this account your favor, mark it, and set down your thoughts as you would in a ship's log below. To understand what stalked us that night in the interior of Borneo, I must return to the dry season of 1892, when I first set foot upon the wharf at Kuching, with the comfortable assurance that the world, though vast, was knowable. It was the 17th of July. The air pressed upon the lungs like wet cloth, heavy with the odor of river mud, copra, and wood smoke. I had been engaged as surveyor to a small prospecting party, financed out of Singapore, our aim to examine reports of auriferous sands along a tributary of the Baram River in the northern reaches of Sarawak. The Dutch had their own concerns to the south. We kept to the territory of the White Rajah, with letters of introduction in my breast pocket and a brass theodolite in its padded case. Our leader, Captain Arthur Henderson, had the bearing of a man who had seen too much of the world to be troubled by any of it. He had served in the Afghan campaigns and turned to colonial enterprise when soldiering lost its savor. Beside him stood Williams, a Welsh engineer whose principal love was machinery and whose principal vice was cards. The last of our European party was young Charles Avery, scarcely 22, a clerk from Penang, whose uncle held shares in the venture and who had been sent, one suspected, to become a man or to vanish in the attempt. We hired 6 Dayak boatmen and 2 IBAN trackers upon the Rajah's recommendation. They were lean, reserved men, their hair bound in cloth, their eyes taking the measure of us without apparent effort. Among them was an older man named Jaga, whose scars and quiet authority marked him as one who had seen both war and the forest's harsher moods. For the first week, our journey upriver proceeded without incident. We poled and paddled against the current, our long prahu slipping between banks thick with nipa and mangrove. At night, we made camp upon gravel bars or small clearings, hammocks strung beneath canvas, rifles cleaned, boots dried by smoky fires. The jungle sang ceaselessly. Frogs, cicadas, the fluting of unseen birds, the distant coughing roar of what Henderson assured us was merely a sun bear. On the 5th evening, as we sat by the fire, Williams produced a small tin of tobacco and passed it around. The Dayaks kept their distance, murmuring amongst themselves. Fireflies drifted between the buttress roots like embers that had lost their way. "Another week of this," Williams said, exhaling, "and I shall begin to miss the smoke of the foundry." "You shall have your machinery soon enough," Henderson replied. "If the samples are as reported, there will be dredges and pumps upon this river within the year." Avery, who had been staring at the sparks, smiled in a manner that was more boy than man. "My mother thinks I shall return with a fortune," he said. "She has a map of Borneo pinned above the mantel. She imagines it is all blank space, waiting for one to write his name upon it." "And what do you imagine?" I asked him. He hesitated. "I imagine," he said at last, "that I shall not spend the rest of my life behind a ledger. That will suffice." I remember the way the firelight caught the fine hairs upon his jaw, the ink stains that no scrubbing had removed from his fingers. I remember thinking that he would either thrive in such places or break upon them. It was that same night that I noted the first small oddity, though at the time I thought little of it. The jungle's chorus faltered. One moment, The frogs and insects shrilled in their endless, overlapping rhythms the next. A hush fell, as if a great hand had passed over the forest. The fire crackled too loudly in the sudden quiet. I looked up, expecting to see some weather change, a bank of cloud crossing the moon, yet the sky between the canopy leaves remained clear and spangled. "It is nothing," Henderson said when I remarked upon it. "Animals are capricious. Perhaps some predator passes." He spoke in the careless tone of a man who has decided a matter and will not revisit it. The silence lasted perhaps a minute before the sounds returned, though not in quite the same pattern, as if some voices had been removed from the choir. Only later did I recall which sounds were missing: the distant whooping of gibbons, which had accompanied us each night until then. 3 days later, we left the main river and began to ascend a tributary scarcely wide enough for our boats. Here the jungle pressed closer, the trees taller and more ancient, their roots like the bones of buried leviathans. Leeches fell upon us from overhanging branches. The air grew stiller, more oppressive. Our guides spoke less and watched the banks with an attention that I attributed to their professional caution. It was Jaga who first refused to go further. We had come to a narrow reach where the water ran dark and slow between walls of foliage. A faint mist clung to the surface, though the sun was high. On the right bank, a great strangler fig wound itself about a dying host tree, its aerial roots contorted in a manner that suggested arrested motion. The air smelled faintly of mold and something else, a musk that did not belong to any animal I recognized. Jagger raised his hand. The boats drifted to a halt. "No further," he said in Malay, his voice low but firm. "The forest is wrong ahead." Henderson frowned. "What nonsense is this? We have barely begun to ascend." The old man shook his head. He gestured at the banks, at the trees. "No birds," he said. "No monkey. No sound. The spirits walk there." I listened then and understood his meaning. The jungle, which had been a constant clamor, lay as quiet as a church at midnight. Even the usual drone of insects was muted, as if muffled by invisible cloth. "Some change in the soil," I said, seeking a rational cause. "Perhaps a pocket of gas, or some plant that discourages insects." Jagger's gaze rested upon me for a moment, unreadable. "Tuan," he said, "I have walked these rivers since I was a boy. The forest is a man. Sometimes he sleeps. Sometimes he speaks. This place is when he holds his breath." Henderson offered more money. He spoke of honor and obligations, of the Raja's writ. The Dayaks conferred amongst themselves, eyes averted from that still reach of water. At last, under protest, they agreed to carry us 2 days further, but no more. I noted the reluctance and filed it away as an example of native superstition, an obstacle to be managed like weather or disease. We pressed on. From that point, small peculiarities accumulated, each one too minor to command full attention, yet together forming a pattern I failed to recognize. We found tracks along a muddy bank where some beast had come to drink. They were large, 3-toed impressions, sunk deep, as if made by something heavy. Henderson declared them to be the spoor of a tapir, though I had seen such prints before, and these did not match. The stride was wrong, the spacing irregular, as if the animal had walked with one foot upon the earth and one elsewhere. At night, our fires burned with a strange pale flame, and the smoke drifted in odd, looping patterns before thinning into the dark. Once, as I lay in my hammock, I heard a sound from beyond the circle of light. 3 clicks in rapid succession, like stones struck together, followed by a soft exhalation. I told myself it was some nocturnal bird, though no wings stirred the leaves. The further we advanced, the more often the jungle fell silent around us without apparent cause. Each time, the hair upon my forearms lifted, as if at a change in pressure. I began to suffer from a peculiar sensation, difficult to describe, the impression that something large moved in parallel with us, just beyond sight, matching our progress with patient interest. It was on the 11th day from Kuching that we left the boats and proceeded on foot, following a narrow game trail that our IBAN trackers claimed would lead us to a ridge where gold had been panned in years past. We divided our loads, hoisted packs, and set off beneath a vault of leaves that admitted only a green, underwater light. Here the forest became a world entire, vines looped from tree to tree like ropes in some great rigging. Ants marched in endless files. The ground was a confusion of roots, fallen branches, and hidden holes. We advanced slowly, marking our route with blazes upon the trunks. The first day's march passed without notable incident, save for the growing sullenness of our guides. That evening, as we sat about a small fire, Henderson spread his map upon a tin case and traced our approximate position with a forefinger. 3 more days to the ridge, he said. We shall make camp there, take samples, and be back to the boats within the fortnight. Avery, who had been tending a blister upon his heel, looked up, and if there is nothing, he asked. Then we shall have had a pleasant walk in the jungle, Henderson said, and you may return to your ledger with tales of hardship to impress the ladies. Even Williams laughed at that, and for a moment the forest seemed less oppressive. We shared the last of the tobacco. Someone began a low song in a language I did not know. The fire cast a small, defiant circle of warmth against the encroaching dark. In the morning, we found that the circle had been trespassed. The perimeter of our camp was marked by a ring of disturbed earth, as if a narrow trench had been scraped in the leaf litter during the night. It ran in a near-perfect circle around our hammocks and supplies, crossing no tree route, deviating for no obstacle. The soil within the line was slightly darker, as if dampened. Boar, Williams suggested, though without conviction. Rooting. Boar do not walk in circles, Avery said. Jagger knelt and touched the line with 2 fingers. He brought them to his nose, frowned, and wiped them upon his sarong. It watched, he said quietly. What watched? I demanded, irritation covering unease. He did not answer. I took measurements, more from habit than belief that the thing warranted study. The circle's diameter was too large and too regular to be the work of any animal I knew. No footprints marked the soil, no drag marks, no sign of tool. The lines simply existed, as if drawn from above, with a compass point at our fire's center. That was the first morning I felt a true misgiving, though I told myself that some natural explanation must exist. Perhaps some burrowing creature, some insect, unknown to science. Borneo still held many secrets. We were, after all, there to uncover them. We broke camp and moved on. The forest grew stranger. We passed through a stand of trees where every trunk bore long, parallel scratches at shoulder height, as if some clawed thing had raked them in passing. The marks were old, the sap long since hardened, yet they continued for nearly half a mile, always at the same elevation, always upon the side facing the trail, as if some invisible hand had tested each tree in turn. At midday, we halted by a stream to refill our canteens. The water ran clear over stones, yet there were no fish, no shrimps, none of the small crustaceans that usually populated such places. The banks were marked by those same 3-toed impressions we had seen before, though here they appeared and vanished in a manner that defied sense. A set of prints leading down to the water, none returning. Another beginning in the middle of the stream and ending halfway up the opposite bank. Perhaps the current has washed away the others, I said, hearing the thinness in my own voice. Perhaps, Henderson replied. He said nothing more, but he checked the action of his rifle twice that afternoon. It was that evening, as we made our third camp on foot, that the forest showed us a glimpse of its teeth. We had chosen a small rise, drier than the surrounding ground, and cleared a space for the fire. The men moved with the efficient weariness of those who have repeated the same tasks too many times. I was setting up the theodolite upon its tripod, intending to take bearings before the light failed, when the jungle's murmur broke with a sound so sudden and so wrong that for a moment I did not comprehend it. It was a scream, high and thin, like metal torn slowly in two, yet there was a note within it that belonged to no machine. It came from perhaps 50 yards away, beyond a screen of rattan and undergrowth. The sound rose, broke, and was cut off as if a hand had closed upon a throat. Every man in camp froze. Even the fire seemed to hesitate before catching. "Monkey?" Williams whispered. "No monkey makes that sound," Avery said. Our Iban trackers exchanged glances. One made a quick gesture with his hand, touching forehead, mouth, and breast. Henderson lifted his rifle. "Stay here," he said. "I shall have a look. It may be a man in trouble." Before any of us could protest, he stepped into the undergrowth, pushing aside the rattan with the barrel. Jaga moved as if to follow, then stopped, his face working. We waited. The jungle closed around the space he had left, leaves settling back into place. I found that I had been holding my breath and let it out slowly. My heart beat too fast. There was a rustle, a crack of a branch, and Henderson emerged, his face pale beneath its sunburn, his jaw set. He had no need to speak. His expression told us he had found something he wished he had not. "What was it?" I asked. "An animal," he said. "Dead, torn. There is no need for you to see it." He glanced once at Jaga, and in that glance I read something like appeal, though for what I could not say. "Tiger?" Williams ventured. "No." Henderson looked back at the trees, his eyes narrowing as if he expected them to move. "I do not know what did that. We shall double the watch tonight." That was the moment, I think, when my rationality began to strain. Until then, every oddity had been a curiosity, an aberration to be catalogued and explained in due course. That scream, and the expression on Henderson's face, suggested that some things would not be so easily placed in the comfortable drawers of natural philosophy. The night that followed remains etched upon my memory with a clarity that time has not eroded. We kept the fire high. 2 men remained awake at all times, rifles across their knees. The jungle, perhaps in answer to our vigilance, grew quieter as the hours wore on, until only the occasional drip of water from leaf to leaf marked the passage of time. It must have been near midnight when I heard it, a soft, measured tread in the darkness beyond the firelight, moving slowly around the perimeter of our camp. Leaves rustled, twigs snapped with a delicacy that suggested intention rather than accident. The sound would approach, pause, retreat, then resume from another angle, as if some unseen thing were taking our measure. "Do you hear that?" Avery whispered from his hammock above me. "Yes," I said. My mouth had gone dry. Henderson, on watch, raised a hand for silence. His eyes tracked the sound, though there was nothing to see beyond the dancing shadows. The tread ceased. For a moment, all was still. Then, from directly behind my hammock, a low exhalation sounded, no louder than a man's sigh, yet so close that I felt the hairs upon the nape of my neck stir. The air grew cold against my skin, as if a door had opened upon some other climate. I spun, my hand fumbling for the revolver at my belt, but there was only darkness and the faint gleam of eye-shine from some small creature high in the branches. We did not sleep much that night, In the morning, we found, once again, a ring of disturbed earth around our camp, this time closer, scarcely 3 feet from our hammocks. Within the circle, our footprints criss-crossed the soil. Without, the jungle floor lay undisturbed. "Footprints," I said, grasping at the familiar. There must be some trace. There were none. From that day, the sense of an unseen presence became our constant companion. We would be marching in single file when a branch would sway above us, though no breeze stirred. Once, a small shower of pebbles fell from the canopy, pattering upon our hats and shoulders, though no cliff or overhang offered an origin. The pebbles were warm to the touch. The animals, when we saw them at all, behaved strangely. A troop of macaques watched us pass without the usual chattering aggression, their bodies pressed flat against the branches, their eyes wide. A hornbill, startled into flight by our approach, crashed into a trunk as if misjudging its distance, then flapped away drunkenly, feathers askew. Our guides grew increasingly uneasy. They spoke little, and when they did, it was in low tones, their eyes flicking often to the shadows between trees. On the 4th day, upon foot, as we ascended toward the ridge, one of the younger Iban, a man named Lhasa, refused to proceed. We had halted for a brief rest, packs dropped, canteens uncapped. I was rubbing at a knot in my shoulder when I realized that Lhasa stood apart, his pack still upon his back, his face turned toward the way we had come. He spoke rapidly to Jaga, who listened, then nodded once. The old man approached Henderson. "He says he will not go further," Jaga translated. "He says the thing that walks with us is angry now." "Angry?" Henderson's laugh was short and without humor. "At what?" "At us," Jaga said simply. "At our noise, at our cutting, at our fire, at our gold." I felt a flicker of irritation. "This is absurd," I said. "There is no thing walking with us. There is some animal, perhaps an unknown species, but it has shown no overt hostility. If we remain calm and observant, we shall." As I spoke, there came a crack like a rifle shot from the forest behind us. A tree, not 10 yards from where Lhasa stood, shuddered. A long, fresh gouge appeared in its bark at shoulder height, as if some immense claw had raked it in a single contemptuous stroke. Splinters flew, one striking my cheek with the sting of a wasp. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Lhasa flung down his pack and ran. He plunged into the undergrowth, not along our blazed trail but at an angle, crashing through ferns and rattans with the blind speed of panic. Henderson shouted after him, but the jungle swallowed both words and man. Within seconds, there was no sound of his passage, as if the forest had closed over him like water. We stood, breathing hard, listening. No one suggested going after him. That was the moment when my mind, already strained, began to slip toward dissonance. The gouge upon the tree was raw, sap oozing, yet I had seen nothing make it, only the sudden mar upon the bark. I told myself that some branch had fallen, that the crack had been wood breaking, not claws. Yet there was no fallen limb upon the ground, no debris save the splinters at our feet. We resumed our march in a silence, broken only by the occasional muttered prayer from one of the Dayaks. By late afternoon, we reached the ridge. It rose from the surrounding forest like the back of some buried creature, a long, low swell of higher ground clothed in thinner trees and scrub. From its crest, we could see, for the first time in days, beyond the immediate wall of foliage, a sea of green stretching to the hazy horizon, broken here and there by the gleam of water. "There," Henderson said, pointing to a pale scar upon a distant slope. "An old landslide, perhaps. Gold often lies where the earth has been disturbed. We shall take samples in the surrounding gullies." We made camp upon the ridge, our hammock strung between the stunted trees, our fire built upon bare earth. The air here felt marginally cooler. The oppression of the lower forest eased. For the first time in several days, I allowed myself to believe that we might complete our work and withdraw without further incident. That night, the jungle did not fall silent. Instead, it spoke in a new voice. Somewhere below the ridge, in the darkness of the valley, something called. The sound was low, almost infrasonic, a drawn-out moan that seemed to vibrate in the bones rather than in the air. It rose and fell in a pattern that suggested neither bird nor mammal, nor any mechanical source. Each time it sounded, our fire guttered, as if the air itself trembled. "What in God's name is that?" Avery whispered, his face pale. No one answered. The call repeated at irregular intervals throughout the night, sometimes nearer, sometimes further, never approaching so close as to reveal its source. Sleep, when it came, was shallow and broken. In the morning, we found that several of our packs had been moved. They had not been rifled, nothing was taken or disturbed within, yet their positions had shifted by inches or feet, as if some curious hand had nudged them while we slept, testing their weight, their balance. The theodolite case, which I had placed beside my hammock, now sat upon a flat stone 3 yards away, its straps neatly arranged. I confess that my composure frayed then. There is a peculiar horror in the knowledge that something has been near you in the night, close enough to touch, and that you did not wake. "We take the samples today and depart at once," Henderson said. His tone admitted no argument, no further debate. "We have come as far as prudence allows." We spent that day moving along the flanks of the ridge, panning in the small streams that cut its sides, chipping at exposed rock with hammers. The work, mechanical and familiar, offered some respite from our unease. We found traces of gold, fine and dispersed, enough to justify a more substantial expedition, perhaps, but not the bonanza some had hoped for. It was in one of those gullies, narrow and steep-sided, that we found the last and most troubling evidence. The gully floor was damp, the soil soft. Upon it lay a series of prints, clearer than any we had seen before. Each was perhaps 9 inches long, 3-toed, with a deep central pad and 2 splayed lateral digits. The impressions were sharp, the edges undisturbed, as if made within the hour. They ran along the gully for perhaps 20 yards, then up the near vertical side, where the creature, if creature it was, had climbed without dislodging so much as a pebble. Halfway up, the prints ceased, not faded, not overlain by others, but simply stopped, as if the maker had stepped from the earth into the air. I stared at that abrupt termination until my eyes watered. "An ape, perhaps," I said, though my voice lacked conviction, "leaping to a branch we cannot see." "There is no branch," William said. He was right. The nearest limb, large enough to bear weight, hung a good 6 feet away from the last print and higher. "Enough," Henderson said. "We have our samples. We leave at first light." That night, the thing came close. The call from the valley ceased with the setting of the sun. The jungle's normal chorus resumed, though with a nervous, jerking quality, as if each creature expected interruption. We kept our fire high, our rifles loaded. The men spoke little, each wrapped in his own thoughts. I lay in my hammock, staring up at the patch of sky visible between leaves, when I felt it. A change in the air, a pressure upon the eardrums, as if we had descended suddenly in an elevator. The sounds of the forest thinned, then dropped away entirely. Even the fire's crackle seemed distant. Into that unnatural quiet came a sound, the soft, deliberate tread I had heard before, now unmistakably upon the ridge itself. It approached from the slope behind our camp, each footfall measured, unhurried. Leaves rustled, small stones rolled. The sound did not attempt stealth. It moved with the assurance of a thing that need not fear discovery. "On your feet," Henderson hissed. Men scrambled from hammocks, rifles snatched up, eyes wide in the firelight. The tread stopped just beyond the circle of light. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, from the darkness, a hand emerged. I call it a hand for lack of a better term. It was long, pale, and jointed, with 3 digits that ended in blunt, keratinous tips. No fur covered it, only a smooth, leathery hide that seemed to drink the firelight rather than reflect it. It rested upon the ground at the very edge of our camp, the digits splayed slightly, as if testing the soil. I could not see the arm or body to which it belonged. They remained hidden behind the screen of scrub. Only that hand, impossibly long, impossibly calm, lay there between us and the dark. No one spoke. The hand flexed once, the digits curling and extending in a slow, deliberate motion, as if considering. The air around it shimmered faintly, as if with heat, though the night had grown suddenly cold. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, a sensation like the onset of a headache, though sharper. "Back," Henderson said hoarsely. "Back, all of you." We had nowhere to go. The hand lifted, hovering for a heartbeat, and in that moment I had the irrational impression that something vast and unseen bent over us, its attention focused, its patience wearing thin. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the hand withdrew into the darkness. The pressure in the air lessened. Sound returned to the jungle in a ragged rush. A frog's croak, an insect's whine, a bird's startled cluck. The fire flared, as if some weight had been lifted from it. For several seconds, no one moved. Then Avery began to laugh, a high, brittle sound that broke into a sob. "We leave now," Henderson said. "Pack only what you can carry at a run. We march by night." We did not argue. In the confusion that followed, much was abandoned. Spare tools, non-essential stores, a crate of samples I had collected with such care. We slung hammocks and food upon our backs, checked weapons, and within 15 minutes we were descending the far side of the ridge, our lanterns hooded, our boots sliding upon loose soil. The jungle by night is a different country. Shapes loom and vanish. Every root is a snake, every vine a grasping hand. We stumbled, cursed, hauled one another upright. Behind us, upon the ridge, something moved. We did not see it, but we heard the soft crack of branches, the occasional dislodged stone. It did not rush us. It merely followed, unhurried, as if confident that the forest itself would conspire to slow us. Once, as we forced our way through a tangle of rattan, I felt a touch upon my back, light as a moth's wing. I spun, raising my revolver, but there was only Avery behind me, his face drawn, his eyes reflecting the lantern's dim glow. "I did not touch you," he said. We marched until dawn, then collapsed in a small hollow, too exhausted to stand. No one suggested a fire. We drank tepid water, chewed dry biscuit, and slept in fitful snatches, each man waking with a start at the slightest sound. The return journey blurred into a sequence of forced marches, snatched rests, and the constant, unnerving awareness of something just beyond perception. Twice more we heard that low, bone-deep call from the forest, though never so near as upon the ridge. Once, in the grey light before dawn, I saw, between 2 trees, a shape that was not a tree, a vertical, pale column that seemed to ripple, then fold in upon itself and vanish. I said nothing. By then, each of us carried his own private visions, and to share them would have been to admit too much. Our guides, who had been reluctant before, now moved with the speed of men fleeing a fire. Jagger's face, once impassive, had taken on a pinched, haunted look. He muttered under his breath as we walked, words in a tongue I did not know. On the second day of our retreat, we found one of the blazes I had cut into a tree upon our ascent, or rather, we found where it had been. The scar in the bark was gone. The tree stood smooth and unmarked, the bark unbroken, save for the natural fissures of age. Yet, I remembered the cut. Clearly, I had made it myself, 3 feet from the ground, with a single stroke of my parang. "Perhaps you misremember the tree," William said, though his voice wavered. We found another blaze half a mile on, likewise healed. The wood beneath the bark, when I scraped at it with my knife, was fresh, as if years, not days, had passed since any wound. The forest, it seemed, was erasing our passage. We reached the boats on the 5th day, footsore, feverish, and reduced in number. Of Lhasa there was no sign. One of the younger Dyaks had developed a shaking ague that left him barely able to stand. Henderson ordered that we embark at once. As the prahu slid into the water, I felt a weight lift from my chest, as if some invisible line had been cut. The river, with its muddy banks and familiar smells, seemed almost homely after the oppressive intimacy of the inland forest. We did not speak much on the journey downriver. Each man nursed his own thoughts, his own private understanding of what had occurred. Once, in the night, I woke to find Avery sitting upright in his hammock, staring into the darkness. "Do you think it will follow us?" he asked, his voice scarcely more than a breath. "No," I said, though I had no basis for the assurance. "It belongs to the forest. We have left its domain." He nodded slowly, as if considering this, then lay back down. I listened to his breathing until it steadied. We reached Kuching in mid-August, our clothes in tatters, our faces hollow. The town, with its whitewashed buildings, its Anglican church, its government offices, seemed almost indecently solid. Men came down to the wharf to take our lines, to clap us on the back, to ask for news of gold. The resident, a stiff, precise man with a greying moustache, received us in his office. He listened as Henderson gave a concise account of our journey, the route taken, the samples gathered, the general tenor of the terrain. He said nothing of circles in the earth, of hands in the dark, of calls that shook the bones. When he had finished, the resident steepled his fingers. "And your conclusion, Captain?" "There is gold," Henderson said. "Enough to warrant further investigation, perhaps, but not enough to justify large expenditure at this time. The terrain is difficult. The local tribes are reluctant." The resident nodded. "Very well. I shall note as much in my report to the Raja. You will, of course, submit your own written account for the company records." We did so that evening, seated at a long table in the back room of the trading house that had sponsored us. The lamplight pooled upon the paper, turning our cramped script into something foreign. I wrote of rivers and ridges, of soil composition and vegetation, of the approximate yield from each pan of gravel. I used the language of my profession: gradient, alluvium, strike, dip. Of the other matters, I wrote nothing. Once, my pen hovered above the page as I considered some oblique reference, a mention of unusual animal behavior, perhaps, or local superstitions impeding progress. In the end, I set the pen down and rubbed my eyes. "What are you leaving out?" Avery asked softly from across the table. "What are you?" I countered. He looked at his own sheet, at the neat columns of his hand. "Everything," he said. "I am leaving out everything. In the official report that went to Singapore, Our journey was a modest success marred by logistical difficulties. The gold was judged insufficient to justify immediate exploitation. Our names appeared in small type at the bottom of a printed circular, our observations condensed to a paragraph. No mention was made of a presence in the forest that could erase blazes from trees and lay circles around sleeping men. In the months that followed, life resumed its accustomed patterns, at least outwardly. Henderson took another commission, this time upon the Mekong. Williams returned to his machines. Avery went back to his ledgers, though he wrote to me once from Penang, a short, tight scripted letter in which he spoke of dreams. "They are always the same," he wrote. "I am upon the ridge, and it is night, but the stars are wrong. They move, very slowly, like fish beneath ice. Something stands just beyond the firelight and watches me. I never see its face. When I wake, my hands smell of damp earth. For my part, I found that the world had tilted, subtly but irrevocably. I could no longer look upon a tract of forest, however small, without imagining what might move within it unseen. The comfortable categories of my education, mammal, reptile, avian, mineral, seemed suddenly inadequate. Years passed. I left Borneo, took engagements in other colonies, married briefly, buried a child. Life, in its obstinate way, went on. Yet the memory of that hand upon the ridge, of the circles in the earth, remained like a stone in the shoe of my thoughts. Once, in 1897, while in Singapore, I encountered a Dutch surveyor in a tavern near the harbour. He was a man of my own age, his face weathered, his eyes bloodshot from drink. We fell into conversation, as men in such places do, exchanging tales of rivers and mountains, of fevers and lost companions. When I mentioned that I had worked in northern Borneo, his manner changed. "Near the Baram?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Some years ago." He hesitated, then leaned closer. "Did you ever hear singing in the ground?" he asked. Like a voice, but not from the air, I felt the hair upon my arms lift, as it had in the forest. "I heard something," I said carefully. He nodded, as if I had confirmed some private suspicion. "We were upon the Mahakam," he said, "far inland. The Dyaks would not go beyond a certain point. Said the forest there was listening. We laughed at them, of course." We went on. At night, the earth would hum beneath us like a distant organ. We found tracks, three-toed. He held up his hand, fingers splayed. Like this. Then, one of our men vanished. We left. I have not been back. We spoke little after that. There was an understanding between us that required no further words, the recognition that we had each brushed against something that lay outside the tidy lines upon maps. In quieter moments, I attempted to rationalize what we had experienced. I read what I could find on unknown apes, on reports of great lizards lingering in remote jungles, on curious atmospheric phenomena. I considered the possibility of mass hysteria, of some fever-induced hallucination shared by exhausted men. None of these explanations sat comfortably upon the facts. How does one account, for instance, for the healed blazes upon the trees, for the packs moved with such fastidious care, for the hand that emerged from the dark, so close that I could have reached out and touched its cold, smooth hide? There are nights, even now, when I wake in my London rooms with the sense that the air around the bed has grown heavy, that some vast attention has brushed against the walls. The city sounds hooves upon cobbles, distant bells. The mutter of late-returning revelers fall away for a moment, and in their place, I hear the soft tread of something moving with infinite patience just beyond sight. On one such night, not long ago, I rose and went to the window. The street below lay quiet beneath a thin rain, the gas lamps casting small halos upon the wet stones. There was nothing to see but my own reflection, older now, the hair thinning, the eyes more deeply set. Yet in the glass, for an instant, I thought I saw behind me, in the corner of the room where the lamplight did not reach, a pale suggestion of length, of joint, of something waiting. When I turned, the corner was empty. I have told this story to very few. When I have, the usual response has been a polite smile, a change of subject, or, at best, a speculative discussion of unknown species and native legends. Men prefer their mysteries to be distant, safely caged within the pages of books or the glass cases of museums. But the forest we walked in 1892 does not care for our preferences. Somewhere in the interior of Borneo, beyond the reach of our maps and our laws, the ridge still rises above the sea of trees. The streams still cut their gullies. The gold still lies in its thin veins. Perhaps other parties have gone there since, seeking fortune. Perhaps they have found nothing but heat and leeches. Or perhaps they too have woken to find circles traced around their sleeping forms. When I close my eyes, I do not see the ridge, or the river, or even the face of young Avery, though I remember them all. I see only that hand, pale and impossibly long, resting with such dreadful composure at the edge of our firelight, as if the forest itself had reached out, curious, to touch the men who presumed to measure it.